Well, men, welcome to this fifth version of, I hope it's not annual, the fifth version of the men's breakfast. And Don, I just realized I haven't had a haircut during this lockdown. All of my barbers and stuff are closed.
I've had two.
Who do you know? So Don
I've
knows people.
I've got two sons, and my one son said, I can do it. In fact, you're going to meet him shortly, my barber.
Oh,
so we're just
man.
hold on that right now.
All right, so you know people. I got it.
Yeah.
Well, men, thanks for being with us today. Just two announcements, and we'll get into this. One is we got approval for a drive-through food drive. And I hope to call it Discovery 500 because hopefully it'll be for 500 cars.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and so we'll have Discovery members do a food drive. We'll collect the food and then set a date and distribute it to the community. So guys, as soon as I give you a date, we need the men's ministry on that big time. And the other announcement is we've got a boot camp on the books. Believe it or not, we're going to get back to normal. And just save these dates, October 29 through November 1. All right, for boot camp. And I've asked Don to speak to us today, and when I did that, our lead pastor said, can I bring a guest? And of course, you can. So thank you, Don.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brian. Thank you. Well, good morning, men. It is so good to be with you. And let me tell you, I am deeply and profoundly encouraged by the way you men have continued to operate within the context of your table groups. Over the course of this, 5 or 6 weeks. It's just been outstanding. I was able to jump in on one a couple of weeks ago, and man, I'm just deeply encouraged by the fact that you're continuing to thrive at this time. And in many respects, what it means is you're winning the battle. So along those lines, that's what I want to talk with you. Actually, I want to have somebody else talk to you about for a few minutes today. I want to bring in my son, Kirk. He's going to join us this morning. He's in town. He and his wife, Julie, and their two little boys, Cooper and Turner, have been staying with us for the past couple of weeks. Going to be here a while longer, which has been a wonderful thing for Mary Ann and I. So anyway, Kirk was in town, and I asked him if he'd come on over, and we would talk a little bit, including a little bit of football. So we're going to do that. Let me introduce it this way. You have heard me talk about the fact that as a man, we all face battles in life. Every man has a battle. And at this point in time, some of those battles, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, some of the battles are raging more than ever. I know many of you have work-related challenges, business-related challenges, job-related challenges, financial challenges, meeting payroll challenges, etc., etc. And so, as you've heard me say before, and I'll just say it again in the event that you've missed it somewhere along the way, every battle we face in men is a second battle in life. And I say that not because it's my opinion, but it's what the Bible says. The Bible says that the first battle that everyone faces, every man faces specifically, is the battle of the mind. And when Brian asked me if I'd come this morning to do this, I said yes, and immediately this came to mind because we're in days of battle. And Kirk and I have been talking about this very thing. And Kirk, from his own life standpoint, though he's still young, has faced many battles in connection with what his career is, which is at this point in time being an NFL quarterback. He is the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. He's going into his 9th year in the NFL, starting hopefully this fall. So anyway, Kirk, along the lines of facing a battle, and the battle of the mind, which you and I have talked about a lot over the years, I want to go back. I obviously know your story. I want to go back to really the first time, junior year of high school, when something happened, football related, that gave you a battle on a second level and a battle on the first level, which was your mind. So tell us a little bit about what that battle was.
Yeah, I broke my ankle at my very first varsity football game. You would think an NFL player would start as a sophomore or a freshman on the varsity. That wasn't the case for me. So I was my junior year, very first game, very first quarter, got hit on my left side and broke my ankle. And went to the doctor and got the news that I was going to be out for much, if not all, of that football season. And they put the cast on my ankle. And I remember driving home and calling my dad and saying, this means by missing my entire junior year of football that I will not be able to play college football because I won't be able to get recruited during my junior year, which is so important. And obviously that discouragement boiled over to frustration at God that he would allow it to happen. And I was complaining and I had my fist at God. And so my mind was going from one negative place to another negative place of just being very discouraged, very frustrated, and it was causing a lot of doubt. And at that moment, my dad challenged me with God's truth and reminded me that God has a plan for my life. God's in control. He allows things to happen. Adversity is a part of life, but God's bigger than it. And it's so interesting now to look back, as he just said, going into my 9th year in the NFL, I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I was complaining the level I was, that, well, now I can't play college football because I have a broken ankle. And I believe that. I really believe that. I had this negative, complaining attitude. And I look back now, and I'm 9 years into a pro career, and you realize God is so much bigger than a broken ankle. And quite frankly, he could have thrown something much worse into my path than what he did. And I probably still could be playing pro football now because God's bigger than that. And, you continue to learn as you go through life that whatever God throws in your path, he is sovereign over. He knew it was going to happen, and he's bigger than it. And our job is to trust and obey him with whatever he's throwing at us. And right now, certainly we've been thrown a unique situation with COVID-19, but I'm going to respond to it the same way I learned to respond with the broken ankle.
Well, obviously, we look back, it's easy to see that. But at the time, it's a difficult battle. And it didn't end there because you did get recruited. You ended up getting an offer at the last minute to Michigan State. You signed on signing day, I think it was early February of your senior year, to play at Michigan State, which committed you to 4 years at Michigan State. There's no way without sitting out a year that you can get out. Sure. Well then, having signed, and you were the only quarterback in your class to sign, so it looked like you had a possibility of actually playing in the future. Right. But then something happened a week later that all of a sudden made for another battle.
Yeah, being an under-recruited player, partly because of the broken ankle, partly just because I wasn't that good. I was late in the process, was kind of gifted a scholarship very late, signed the scholarship. Once you sign, you're legally bound to Michigan State. There's no going back, there's no give backs, there's no changing your mind once you sign that scholarship. It's a celebratory moment, but it's also locking yourself in. Well, a week later, I got a call from our head coach at Michigan State that said, Kirk, we have a quarterback from Texas who did not sign on signing day. He was extending his decision-making process. He's coming up to Michigan to visit with us, come to a Michigan State basketball game, and he's someone we're going to offer a scholarship to, and he may attend Michigan State, and you guys would be in the same class. Well, his name was Nick Foles, and I thought, okay, this will be interesting. Only one quarterback plays, and if we're both in the same class, our eligibility clock will be at the same time. And when I went and looked up what Nick had done in high school, he went to the same high school as Drew Brees. He had broken all of Drew's records. He had played in the state championship game. He had played in front of 20,000 people for several of his high school games. And I realized, this was going to be tough. To ever be able to play at Michigan State would be unlikely with Nick Foles and I at the same time arriving on campus. And I told the coach that and how disappointing that was. And he basically said, tough luck, you better compete and you better be good enough to play or Nick will play. But welcome to big-time college football. So again, discouragement, disappointment, frustration. My attitude again, because I went to my dad as a sounding board, I said, I just locked myself in. If I hadn't, I would get out now because the roadmap is telling me it's foolish to go to Michigan State. I'll never play. But now I'm stuck. What do I do? And again, a similar answer to when I broke my ankle, which was reminding me of God's truth, God's word, and God's sovereignty. And we had to hold on to that and say, Lord, you have led me here. I've got to trust you. But it doesn't seem to be the right move. And again, we let him handle it from there, and he certainly did.
Yeah. Well, and what happened was, the following spring football came around, and as it turned out, and now this is a dad speaking, I would say this, he wouldn't say this, but in effect, he beat out Nick. And as a result of that, Nick decided to transfer. So all of a sudden, Nick decides to transfer out. Kirk now has clear sails to being the starting quarterback. By the way, Brian Hoyer, who has now played 12 years in the NFL, was the starter ahead of Kirk. All of a sudden, Nick is going to leave. The path is clear for Kirk until something else happened. Nick goes out and someone else comes in. Tell us the story of Keith Nickel.
Yeah, I grew up in West Michigan, and at the time, I was really under the radar, but I was in the shadow of Keith Nickel. Keith was a quarterback as well from West Michigan. Keith was a highly recruited player, many offers, had originally committed to Michigan State, ended up decommitting from Michigan State, and then reopened his recruitment, ended up attending Oklahoma. That didn't work out because Sam Bradford was a starter there, so Keith ended up transferring out of Oklahoma and back to Michigan State. Keith was one of the top 100 players in the country, regardless of position, coming out of high school. He was one of the, if not the most recruited player out of West Michigan, where I was from, in the last decade. And they do a quarterback camp every year called the Elite 11, where they take the top 11 quarterbacks, high school quarterbacks in the country, and invite them to a camp. Keith was one of those 11. So he was one of the best of the best. And I was not going to play at Michigan State or go to Michigan State as long as Keith was going there. He decommitted, which was what opened the door for me to go there in the first place. Nick then arrives. Nick and I compete. Nick leaves. Right when Nick leaves, at the exact same time, within a week, Keith decides to come back to Michigan State. And so the path that had been blocked, that then opened for a matter of a day or two, then appeared to be blocked again. And I again thought to myself, oh boy, more competition, and quite frankly, competition that is probably better than me. What do I do now?
Well, and as you might guess, we're having now a repeating conversation over what has been my life verse, still is, and is now becoming his life verse, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which is,
trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your steps. And that's the verse. And as you can see, many times I was leaning on my own understanding. My own understanding was a broken ankle means I can't keep playing football. These other quarterbacks being on my team means I will never play. That was my understanding, but God had other plans. And it's interesting to note that in Nick transferring, God had other plans for Nick too. Nick ended up playing at the University of Arizona for several years, was drafted ahead of me in the same draft, and is now a Super Bowl MVP. So God had a plan for Nick too.
And a follower of Jesus.
Oh, correct. Yeah, rock solid. So God had a plan for Nick too. And again, when I would have said, oh, one of us will not play, one of us will, God said, Kirk, don't sell me short. I can get you both where I want to take you, regardless of what you think.
All right, so what happens, again, speaking as a dad, is Kirk ends up beating out Keith Nickel, to everybody's surprise. Keith ends up he's a very good athlete, ends up moving to wide receiver, and ends up playing as a wide receiver for his last few years at Michigan State. Well, we're coming into the draft in the NFL. And Kirk has been told that he appears to be one of the top 8 quarterbacks of his class coming out. Should be drafted that year. 2012 was the year. And going into the draft, Kirk, based on what your agent was telling you, what was the expectation with regard to the players coming out? Where did you kind of see yourself based on agent information where you'd be drafted?
Well, the draft is really broken up into 3 days. First round on Thursday, second and third round on Friday, and then the 4th through 7th rounds on Saturday. I had a strong feeling I wasn't going to go in the first round. I was self-aware. I'd love to be a first-round pick. Probably wasn't going to happen. That would be Thursday night. Friday night was going to be the second and third round, which is where I would like to have gone, felt I was going to go. Usually 3 to 4 quarterbacks get drafted in the first round, and then I would have probably been in that next crop that would get drafted on Friday night. And then I knew there were about 8 of us that were kind of all in a grouping together that were viewed as, legitimate NFL prospects. After those 8, I thought maybe the 8th guy would fall on Saturday and get picked on Saturday. But the majority of those 8 quarterbacks were going to go on Thursday and Friday. And so I was guessing I was in the back half of those 8, and I would go on Friday.
All right, so I think 4 of them did go on Thursday night in the first round.
They did.
And then there was the next 4, which included Russell Wilson, Nick Foles, yourself, and Brock Osweiler? Okay. So Friday night, we sit down to watch the draft. Brock gets picked. Mm-hmm. Russell gets picked. Nick gets picked. And Friday night ends, and you've not yet been picked.
No, I was the 8th guy.
So what do you think when you go to bed that night?
Well, by this point I've learned, right? Yeah. You learn, you live life long enough, you walk with God long enough, the faith thing, the obedience thing starts to become more the default than the thing you have to still be learning. So to be honest, my mind was, okay, God, you've proven yourself faithful before. You haven't failed me yet. I'm going to trust you on this one. But it sure would have been nice to be a first rounder. Sure would have been nice to be a top 10 pick. For whatever reason, your path for me has continued to be one of waiting, continued to be one of kind of scratching my head and appearing to be at dead ends. But as you walk with God long enough, you realize that's kind of the way of God. He's going to bring you to the edge of the Red Sea, and you're going to look at the water and realize it's a dead end, look at mountains on your right and your left, and look back and realize the Egyptians are chasing you if you take the story from Exodus. So God does that in all of our lives so that he can be God and he can part the Red Sea. And he had done that previously in my football career. So again, my mind, it was a battle to say, boy, this is not looking good. But got a call the next day and fortunately was picked.
Well, yeah, but the pick wasn't what you thought.
No.
We got up on Saturday morning and the draft is going to continue. And of course, his agent is who's Mike McCartney's his name. He's a strong follower of Jesus Christ. He's a wonderful guy. And he said, Kirk, you could go to any number of teams. I don't know where you're going to go. Anyway, the draft begins to unfold, and then you get a phone call.
Right.
So tell us what happened.
Well, I was told as you're prepping for the draft that you're going to get a call from random phone numbers, but you need to pick up because that could be a team. And, based on the location of where the number's calling from, you get an idea of which team it is. And they said if a scout or a quarterback coach calls you, they're not picking you. That's just to kind of get an update and gather some information. But if you get a call and the name of the person calling is the head coach, the general manager, the owner, you're getting picked. They're not wasting their time to call you just to ask you how the weather is where you are. So I got a call from Virginia, and I knew there wasn't a pro football team in Virginia, but I also knew Washington, D.C. was near Virginia, and so I thought, the Washington Redskins, they had just drafted the Heisman Trophy winner with the second overall pick, Robert Griffin. I wonder why they're calling, but I figured maybe it's just a quarterback coach just getting information. So I answer the phone, and he says, "Hi, Kirk, this is the head coach of the Washington Redskins, Mike Shanahan." And I grew up watching football. I knew Mike Shanahan was a Super Bowl winning coach, and I realized he's picking me. And so the Redskins picked me, but it was so odd to be picked by them because they had picked a quarterback with the second overall pick that it seemed like a dead end. And I got off the phone, and rather than having a celebratory atmosphere of, I just got drafted, I'm living a dream, it was more of a, I'm going to the Washington Redskins, who out of 32 teams in the NFL, I would have told you before the draft, this was the 32nd most likely team to pick me. And so it was a unique dynamic in our living room when they drafted me.
Yeah. Okay. So things have obviously played out. Again, we couldn't see into the future at that point in time. Now we look with hindsight. You eventually became the starter in Washington, played there when your contract came to an end, couldn't come to agree on terms. And anyway, the Minnesota Vikings came along, and very glad to be in Minnesota. Very glad to be in Minnesota these days. So, Kirk, it's been quite a journey. The word of the Lord, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your steps, has proven to be true. And so the men who are watching this morning, all of them are facing battles in their own realms, career, home, health, whatever. If you had a thought or two or three at the end here, just in the way of encouraging them based on what you've learned through the journey that you just described, what are one or two kind of key ideas that you'd pass along?
Yeah, I think I'd have two. One is if you give God access to your life the way I did as a junior when I broke my ankle, and I said, okay, I'm gonna trust him. I'm gonna obey him. I'm gonna take his word seriously, and we'll see what he does with it. And when you do that, God says, thank you. I'm gonna take over now. He's going to bring you to some dead ends. He's going to bring you to a moment where you say, where are you, God? What are you doing? And the reason he'll do that, I believe, is so he can be God, is so he can show up. And I do believe God structured my journey in football from a high school player being recruited to now being going into my 9th year in the pros. He structured the whole journey so that I would look back and say, God did it. If I had been a top 10 recruit in the country, if I had had 50 scholarship offers, if I had been a first round pick and then was looking back now as a ninth year in the pros, I would say, well, I did it. I was supposed to do this. I was this good. This was supposed to happen. God chose my path to be one of, it wasn't supposed to happen by your understanding, and that's the way I want it. And so as you run your businesses, as you show up to work, as you lead your families, I've learned, and I would say to you, God's going to allow some battles. God's going to allow adversity. God's going to allow moments where you say, I'm in a battle that I likely can't win. And God's going to say, thank you, because your inadequacy will be able to reveal that I'm God and that I'm big enough to be God in your life. But our job is, do we trust and obey him to allow him to be God? And then the second thing I would just say is, as we have these battles, let's prioritize battles correctly. I think we as men, our battle can become lowering our score on the golf course. Our battle can become how soon can I get to retirement. Our battle can become how quickly can I buy that thing that I want. And that becomes our consuming focus. And we prioritize those battles over the battle that would be having a healthy marriage, of raising our kids correctly and in a healthy way. Or most importantly, our battle of just getting up every morning and carving out time to spend with the Lord. So, let's prioritize the right battles and not look back when we're in our 70s or 80s and say, boy, I won some battles. They were just some really insignificant battles looking back. And meanwhile, some really important battles I neglected and I lost those. I think we all have the time and the ability to win battles, but we can't win them all. Let's make sure we pick the right ones to win.
Amen. Those are good words. Well, men, thanks for being with us, and thanks for allowing Kirk and I to speak into your lives a little bit. Our heart is for you. We want to see God do a great work in your life. It is a thrill for me as a father to hear my son say, it wasn't me who did it, it was God did it. And God allowed things to unfold in my life in such a way to show forth his greatness. In many, many cases, God is in fact going to allow battles to come about in our lives, of which we do come up short in order to show forth his greatness. And maybe you're facing one of those battles today. And so even the time that you spend discussing with one another now, and we'll have some questions for you to discuss, keep in mind that you serve and live for a big God who is fully capable of accomplishing what he wants to accomplish in and through your life for his glory and for your good and for the good of many people through your life. He's on your side. He's for you in the battle. So thanks for being with us today, men. Continue to battle on. The world needs men who are winning the battles of life.